2, 3, funky.
This is why you should never watch my videos before going to bed. In 1986, a young girl opens her closet to find a man wearing a dress and holding an axe. He grabs her and ties her up, and then walks around the house and does the same thing to the rest of her family. While the guy is ransacking their house, one of the kids breaks free, runs next door, and tells his neighbor. The neighbor calls the cops show up, the family's saved, but the guy is nowhere to be found. The family leaves the house and stays with relatives in hopes that they'll catch this guy before they have to go back. But after a few weeks, they haven't caught him, there aren't any leads, and they say, you know what, we'll go back to our house anyways. As the family's pulling back into their driveway, the father looks up at one of the windows and sees for a split second the head of the man with the dress in their bedroom. They call the police, who go in and find pennies glued to the ceiling and weird writing all over the house, but they can't find this crazy guy. Until one of the officers found a secret crawl space in the basement, where psychotic killer Danny LaPlante had been living for 2 months. This sounds totally made up until you listen to the police report. In the early 90s, a teenage girl started to see these shadowy figures that would come into a room at night and crawl all around her room and even grab at her legs. At the same time, her health began to rapidly deteriorate, which ultimately led to her death, which doctors never understood. A few days after her death, her sister woke up to a whistling sound and saw a creature crawling around her room with no face. The same night, her mom was ripped out of bed by someone. The father calls the police, who come over, they search the house, they don't find anything, it's all quiet. As they're about to leave, they hear something. Horrifying screams coming out of the bedroom. They run inside, no one's in there, but there are these huge gashes on the wall that were not there before. The police get out of there. In the police report that was filed immediately after this house call, the chief inspector and the 3 officers that were there that night swear they saw and heard the same things as the family, which means the police officially believed that the house was haunted.
Quick thinking is probably the only reason her and her daughter are still alive today. This story is creepy, 100% true, and I'm doing it all in one part. So keep up. A woman got in the elevator in her apartment building with her daughter, and a man walked in behind her. She put her floor number, but he didn't. She glanced over and saw that he was in a yellow raincoat and was carrying something wrapped in a newspaper. She got nervous, so she pretended to call her husband, who wasn't home, and she told him to open the door for her when she gets there. She got out on her floor, and to her horror, the man walked out behind her. She got to her door and began banging on it and yelling for her husband to come open up. The man saw this and he turned around and walked away. But in Korea, all the doors have passcodes. She began putting in her code, but it made a beeping noise. The man realized this, turned around, and began running towards her. She frantically put in the code, threw her daughter in, jumped in behind her, and closed the door with the man just inches away. Months later, she saw that same man on the news wearing his yellow raincoat. He was the serial killer Ilyyy Chul.
Story time about my worst trip off LSD. So one of the kids in my friend group was about to leave for Arizona, and we would always talk about how we need to trip together before he leaves. And anytime that I would trip off acid, I would go to my one plug. Well, he ran out, so we had to go to somebody else. And I've never tried this kid's stuff before. I just said, fuck it, YOLO. Which should not have been my motto at the time, but it was. So that night, we're in the car, and one of our friends is driving because he's sober, obviously. And before I put the tab on my tongue, I started to get really nervous. And I have never felt like that before I've taken acid. But I kind of just said fuck it, and I put it on my tongue. So we go pick up 2 more people that I'm not really close with. So then we make our way over to our other friend's apartment. And I'm kind of feeling it, but not really. But then as soon as we walk into that apartment, I start tripping balls. And you know, everything was going good. But then my dumb ass decided to look in the fucking mirror. And as soon as I look in the mirror, I see myself smile back at me, like for part 2. Okay, part 2. So like I said, I look in the mirror and I see myself smiling back at me. And that's whenever everything went south so quick. I sat on the bed, tried to pull myself together because I didn't want to make a fucking scene in front of everybody. But then I got caught in this fucking loop. And if you don't know what the loop is, then I'm going to tell you what it is. It's basically where you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then I started looking around at everybody and it looked like their faces were melting. One of my friends got up off his chair, walked to the other side of the room, and I watched him do that. But when I looked back over at the fucking chair, he was still sitting there. So I looked at my one friend that was sober, who I was actually really close with, and I think he saw the look in my eye and he was like, "Do you want to leave now?" And I just shook my head. Yeah, like I could not deal with that shit anymore. So we go to his car and then we drive to my boyfriend's house. Because I could not go home. I would have got crucified. Well, we get in the house and as soon as his mom sees me, she knows that something's wrong. Like for part 3. Okay, part 3. So like I said, I walked in and she knew that something was wrong with me right away. Because she was like, oh, I have a letter from your boyfriend. And usually I would run up, grab it, read it really quickly, because I would only get like 1 letter a week. But instead I ran downstairs because her face was fucking melting. So 5 minutes later, she has to come downstairs and help me get dressed into my pajamas because I forgot how to dress myself. I didn't want to be left alone that night, so my friend stayed in the basement with me. So he went and tried to go to sleep, but he couldn't because I was watching Butterfly Effect for 8 hours straight. Like that was the only thing that could calm me down. But I still don't even know all the freaking words to it, which is weird. Like he would try to change the video and somehow I end up back to Butterfly Effect. And then he tried to kiss me. So he left the next morning because he had to go to work, which was at like 11 a.m. And I took this tab at 8 p.m. the day before. So I was getting texts like, where are you? You're supposed to be home now. So I had to go home and act normal in front of everybody while I'm still tripping balls. And I also got grounded for coming home late because I could not come home at the right time because I was tripping so hard. And this lasted for about 24 hours.
When I was 13 years old, I went to buy my first pair of sexy underwear. And of course I splashed out because I went to Primark and they were only £1. As I left Primark, I walked into the shopping centre and there was a group of 17-year-old boys and they were really fit. So I tried to strut and show off and then I fell over. My bags went flying and thongs went all over the floor. And an old man came and helped me pick them up. And as I gathered myself to leave, one of the fit boys tapped me on the shoulder. And he said, you missed one, and handed me a lacy thong.